Comstock area. And of course, when we talk about Comstock, I think most of us are familiar with what that entails. We're talking up here in Virginia City, Gold Hill, Silver City, Dayton, even down to Carson City and beyond. It definitely took a hold and was very clear in some of the early writings in some of the newspapers up here, and even for people personally, as we will see in a minute. So one of the sources of proof of spiritualism that was taking place. Now, the Comstock was very active, and at the time you had well-known spiritualists, mediums, and other personalities of spiritualism coming up here to the Comstock to talk to people who were interested about spiritualism. And this happened pretty much between the 1860s, 1880s, and even beyond. And the subject was always being piqued by newspaper publications and just the experiences that people were having. The people up here were very interested in learning about spiritualism. And we have a gentleman that you probably have heard of if you're familiar with Virginia City and the area, but a Mr. Alfred Doughton, who actually was an editor of the Gold Hill Daily News. He was also known as Dean of the Newspaper Men of Nevada, and he was very much interested in spiritualism himself. And just a fun fact, when I was kind of, getting myself familiar with Mr. Doughton, I found out that his sister, one of his sisters, Lizzie Doughton, was actually a huge spiritualist herself. And she actually went around the country talking about spiritualism, lecturing about spiritualism, and herself was even a trance speaker. And so I don't know if that was part of the reason why he was interested in it, but he was really interested in it so much that he kept his own detailed daily diary of the things that were happening up here on the Comstock. He made accurate, like I said, in-depth daily entries referencing spiritualism on the Comstock. And he did this from like 1860s all the way to 1900. And today, we're only going to focus on a few of his entries because there were numerous ones for many, many years. And the entries we're going to look at is just from 1 month of 1 year, and that was October 1867. One of the first entries we see in October of 1867 of Mr. Doughton was on the 1st and 2nd of October. And he says that he attended a lecture by a man named Benjamin Todd on spiritualism. Now you're like, who is Benjamin Todd? Well, at the time, Benjamin Todd was just not your average neighbor next door. He actually was a lecturer on spiritualism. He also, at one time down in California, he was very active in that movement, but was also a part-time editor of one of the spiritual publications down here. He had a lot of knowledge, So when Mr. Doughton talks about attending a lecture with Mr. Benjamin Todd, it was of substance. It was of something really important. October 4th through 6th, he says that he attended another lecture by Benjamin Todd each evening from the 4th through the 6th. October 7th, there was another lady up here called Ada Hoyt Foy. She conducted, it says, her first seance, he says, at the district courtroom. Go figure. A courthouse conducting a seance, right? We talked about the White House. It's pretty amazing the venues that they would use. Now, who is Ada Hoyt Foy? Well, Ada Hoyt Foy was a well-known writing and rapping medium. Jen kind of talked to you about what a rapping medium was, how they would use knocking sounds, bumping sounds, thumping sounds as a way to communicate. She was also a prominent lecturer on the spiritualism circuit, and she also was a reader. October 9th, Mr. Doughton says he attended Ada Foy's second seance. October 10th, Alf Doughton met with Ada herself when the spirits she was communicating with literally rapped that they wanted to speak with him personally. So he went and spoke with her to see what the spirits had to say. October 19th, Alfred attended a lecture, another one, by Mr. Benjamin Todd. October 24th, Alfred met with Ada again, and she contacted somebody that Alfred knew, somebody named Samuel Doughton. And allegedly, this individual told her the details of his death which she then shared with Mr. Alfred Doten. As you can see, just by those entries that he entered, as I said, this is just 1 month, we can see just how active spiritualism was up here on the Comstock. Things were happening all the time. Spiritualism was active and was of interest here prior even to Mr. Doten being here, and well after he was here. It continued. And we actually see later that, and even before Mr. Doten and after and while he was here, the newspaper publications were advertising spiritualism events. They were advertising them to the hilt. And one of the newspapers that advertised a lot was the Gold Hill Daily News. And it records and advertised those numerous events for several years. Some of the next slides you'll see if there are just some of them, and I'll refer to just a couple because there's a lot. But in 1864 through 1865, on March 12, 1864, there was a lady called Miss Emma Hardinge, who they said will be delivering a lecture about religion and spiritualism. Now, Emma Hardinge was an English spiritualist. She was a lecturer. She was also an advocate for early modern spiritualism. She was also a clairvoyant and a spirit medium. Well, what's a clairvoyant? Do you know what a clairvoyant is? Until I got involved with paranormal, I never knew what those were. But clairvoyant, they perceive events in the future or beyond normal sensory contact. This is who Emma Hardinge was. She also was a spirit medium, connecting with spirit guides and ascended masters and sharing that wisdom from the afterlife with whoever she was talking to. October 17, 1865, another article stated that the Democratic Convention, believe this, hired a renowned female clairvoyant. Do you think they should do that nowadays?
Can you even imagine?
Right? No. Pretty amazing. 1866, frequent lectures by Mrs. C.M. Stowe were held on March 4th, March 18th, and April 1st, 1866. It also said she will also be available the week of March 9th to examine and prescribe for patients. She lectured at the VC Hotel down in Gold Hill during those visits and moved to a 2-story house south of the Crown Point so she could be available to people. In July of 1966, she was again available in Gold Hill to examine and prescribe for patients. Madam C.M. Stowe was a clairvoyant physician. She was a prominent spiritualist and lecturer, and it's said that she was very well respected, not just by people who believed in spiritualism, but by non-believers alike. She also traveled the Pacific Coast offering her clairvoyant talents and also sharing her lectures and her information. She was a very prominent person up here. You got 1867, again you have Ada Foy, as we talked about. She's the one that conducted a seance in the courtroom. She came back and she also did another one in the district courtroom. So the courthouse was used quite a bit. 1870, March 16th and 17th, a pair of brothers named the Davenport brothers conducted what they called sacred seances and strange performances at Piper's. Now the Davenport brothers, I was like, who are they? I looked them up, and it's interesting. Their names were William and Ira, and they actually were involved in the spiritual movement way before it even was a thing, in 1859, prior to the Civil War. Some people considered them magicians, and so sometimes they weren't well trusted, but they did build a contraption that a lot of mediums went on to use, and it was called a spirit cabinet. And it was basically, they actually constructed it of wood, and it was made for mediums to put up on a stage like this, and the medium would sit on one side, and a wall was here, and the person that they were meeting with was on the opposite side, and they could not see each other. And it was a very prominent tool that was used for a long time by the mediums. So the Davenport brothers were here. 1872, October 25th and November 1st, a lady named Mrs. Fannie T. Young was an inspirational trance medium. She lectured on spiritualism, guess where? At the Methodist Church in Gold Hill. Think about that. Spiritualism lectures today, would they be held in the church? Probably not. But back then, you'd be amazed at how many lectures and things were conducted at churches. And as a trance medium, she was her form of communication with the spirit was considered one of the oldest methods of communication. But basically what a trance medium was allowed spirits to use the body of the medium to communicate. 1874, March 31st, a gentleman by the name of Gerald Massey performed Why Am I a Spiritualist? At Piper's a few times. And Gerald Massey didn't really practice spiritualism, but he was an English poet and he was a writer on spiritualism. And in 1876, February 4th, there were notices published that a Mrs. Eiley Bowers was now telling fortunes in Virginia City. And so we will hear a little bit more about Mrs. Bowers in a few minutes. March 10th through the 13th of 1876. Another pair of brothers, Thorne and Darwin, conducted seances at Piper's. Now these guys, they had an act in England. It was known as the Royal Illusionists and Legitimate Exposers of Spiritualism is what they called themselves. They were brothers Ernest and Heinrich Darwin Thorne, originally from Poland, toured Europe with their acts, and then came here to America and eventually to Piper's here in Virginia City to perform their act. They were considered basically magicians and illusionists. As you can tell, just from those few things that we shared, these were prominent people coming up here to the Comstock to share and to teach about spiritualism and every and any kind of variety, any kind of gift that they had. And so, as Jen was saying, today that interest is still here. It's very much still here. It's one of the reasons why a lot of us got involved in paranormal, is to kind of figure out how all that works. So thank you for your time on this. And in a moment, we're going to take a little bit of a break, I believe.
Yeah, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Just, grab something to drink.
Right, we have snacks and waters in the back.
And then we are going to hear from Miss Eiley Bowers.
So thank you, Joel.